Hi everyone, welcome to SAMA, a weekly program which invites experts each week to discuss a topic from their area of expertise. This week we are delighted to have Dr. Kelly Miller as our guest expert to discuss brains, brain health, and how we can keep our brains functioning at optimum levels. Conditions like ADHD, anxiety, autism, spectrum, depression, insomnia, brain fog, PTSD, it's a long list. They all have one thing in common though. They all are related to brain function. Doing the daily crossword puzzle and drinking ginkgo biloba may not be enough in fighting off mental decline. Alzheimer's and dementia are on the rise. Cognitive decline is often the first step to brain function decline. But more importantly, there are many strategies that can prevent this condition and potentially reverse it. Your brain is like a supercomputer with billions of neurons making different connections all the time. So just like any complex piece of equipment, maintenance is needed to keep it in top order. Dr. Kelly Miller received a Doctor of Chiropractic from the Logan University of Health Sciences in 1980. He became a fellow of the Acupuncture Society of America and became a board-certified naturopathic physician from the American Naturopathic Medical Certification and Accreditation Board in 2001. Dr. Miller founded Health Restoration in 2013 based on his belief that a natural synergistic approach to healthcare is the optimum approach to addressing the healthcare issues people face on a daily basis. Kelly, welcome to our show. It's fantastic to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
How did you first become interested in brain health?
Well, really out of self-preservation, John.
Right.
I was asking you about the All Blacks earlier, so I played rugby for 21 years. I played actually in Auckland in 81. I was a center and I've probably been involved in 10,000 tackles, receiving or delivering them, and had a couple of car crashes, and one I was knocked unconscious and I wasn't seatbelted, and I had a mischievous youth, so to speak, but really in my mid 50s, I was really having some problems, things that like I was a movie buff. I used to watch movies all the time, and I could see the picture, I could see the face of the actor or actress, but I couldn't remember their name.
Yes.
And then I was traveled a lot, and I was looking at pictures when we were in Europe and different places, and I couldn't remember the name of the cities and different things like that. And I was even losing some information about technical things and that I would use every day. Technical terms like cis-strand or trans, which is a right or left-handed molecule, things like that, which yes. I should know. And so I knew I was having some problems, so I started an investigation in 2015 and spent 3 years researching natural remedies, different things that help restore cognitive, preserve cognitive, restore cognitive function.
Yes.
And, one of the things I was looking for was a natural remedy, because there's been some 350 drug trials for Alzheimer's, and they've all failed miserably. And the reason is that drugs only work in a single pathway. They inhibit or stimulate a specific enzyme, and there are many pathways to Alzheimer's. There's a lot of different things that can create the cognitive decline and the Alzheimer's brain.
Okay, well, you've mentioned the sports injuries and the car accidents. What other things can affect the decline of brain function?
Well, in the book, I'll flash the book here real quick.
Oh, you can hold it in front. I don't mind.
Saving your brain. So each letter is an acronym, and so S is for sleep. So we now know when we have sleep disturbance, our sleep pattern changes, have trouble falling asleep, or we're waking up more frequently, that's actually a sign of a brain imbalance. And one of the biggest things that happens in our sleep cycle or we don't get in our sleep cycle, that's really important, is if we don't get into something called delta sleep. And there's 5 different cycles of sleep, and we go through them about 5 times a night, and we should accumulate about 90 minutes of each.
Okay.
And this delta sleep is when our brain actually shrinks almost 50%. So it's almost like we have a metabolic squeezing of the brain sponge, but it compresses down, and we get through our lymphatic system, we get a lot of toxins out. So if we don't get into that restorative sleep, then we don't clean our brain. It's the only time we can never produce a beta in the brain. And so sleep is really big. A is for autonomic balance or imbalance, and really that's related to this is such a complicated world we live in now. So much stress.
Tell me about it.
And everybody's stressed out. And we find when we do something called heart rate variability, 9 out of 10 of our patients are locked into this fight, flight, or sympathetic response. So one of the real keys is how do we de-stress the brain? So when we get stress is brain stress. Mm-hmm. And literally when we have stress, that's primordial, fighting from the lion, tiger, bear, or whatever. Only it's a multitude of other things that create that chemistry and physiology, and we produce adrenaline and cortisol. And although that's necessary for an emergency, if that ongoing stress keeps going, the cortisol literally kills the neurons in the brain. So we really got to learn how to distress. That's a real biggie. So V is for vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. We're missing key things, and you mentioned ginkgo biloba. That's, I've got 2 chapters in the book on different nutrients that are really important for the brain. Yes. I is for infection. We have a lot of low-grade infections will cause problems in the brain. One of the things we found out, in the Alzheimer's brain and the Parkinson's brain, we have this beta plaquing. And so why are we producing all this beta, and why is it plaquing in the brain? And right. One of the things that we found that a beta does is it acts like an antibiotic. So these low-grade infections, that's just a protective mechanism that the body's trying to do to protect the brain. And so if we get rid of that infection, the chronic inflammation, chronic infection, then the beta, there's no reason for the body to keep producing a beta. So we look at all these different things. N is for neurohormones. They're very neuroprotective. The stress causes our hormone systems to go down. G is for genetics. There's specific, particularly the ApoE4 gene. About 50% of the people who have Alzheimer's have that. And the significant thing about the ApoE4 gene, it's actually an LDL, and what it does, its purpose is to get a beta out of the brain. And it's just the least efficient of those genetic variants. They've got an ApoE2 and ApoE3. But if we take extra niacin, we can compensate for it. So it's good if we know that, because we just need, a lot of the genes variants are actionable. If we know what weakness we have, then we can support it nutritionally, or through lifestyle things, getting regular exercise, keeping our blood sugars stable. Y is for lifestyle belief system, how our perception of stress. If we take, a poll on people and we said, okay, on the scale of 0 to 10, how many people are a 9 or 10? Raise your hand. Okay, then we have, okay, how many people are a 1 or 2? If we take that high group compared to that low group, there's a 400% increased risk factor. So again, that gets back to that stress, the perception of stress is so big. And we have O is for obesity. So the fatter we get, the more oxidative stress, the smaller our brain becomes. U is for unfriendly environment, and this is a real big, one of the big factors. The sleep, the stress, but the unfriendly environment we have. I know in China now there's a lot of environmental issues, a lot of challenges there in some of the big cities. From pollution in the United States, we have things like glyphosates, and we have mercury, and we have aluminum. I live in Tampa Bay and Miami areas in Florida have some of the highest aluminum concentrations in the United States.
Mm.
So each one of those, B is for blood flow, R is for reading, A is for activities, exercise, I is for insulin sensitivity, resistance, and N is for neurotransmitters. So each of those are important. I think some of them have a little more importance. The environment is really big. Blood sugar regulation is really big, and cardiovascular health is very big.
Yes,
And
it's the longest sacrament I've ever heard of.
there's a lot of factors in there. So when we
Yeah.
look at different people, and sometimes we're trying to look at those weak links. So we figure out, like this patient A may have blood sugar problems, and they have ApoE4 gene. Someone else may have had the head trauma.
Yes.
So
Wow.
we
Isn't it surprising how you're saying that all these studies to try and combat Alzheimer's have failed, all these formal studies, and they've been focusing on the plaque in the brain, trying to prevent it from building up. And you're saying that it's actually the body intentionally trying to combat.
Yeah, and another form of a beta, which I failed to mention when I was talking about unfriendly environment, is that it binds with heavy metals. So when you get mercury and aluminum are neurotoxic, they go straight to the brain.
Yeah.
And that's why some of the vaccines can be problematic, because they'll accumulate, with the aluminum in there. But so again, the beta is trying to bind. A beta production increases when blood sugars go up. So we're creating the environment, consciously or unconsciously, that is making the beta production. And when we talk about stress, one of the things when we talk about cortisol, what cortisol does, cortisol produces sugar. So literally, you can be so stressed and be producing so much sugar that you're elevating your sugars. And that's why sometimes people, when they're under stress, they have trouble losing weight, because they're producing hundreds and hundreds of calories from the glucose.
I often wondered about that. Isn't that amazing? And that is so. It is the way your body's being made for emergency situations. You've got the energy to fight or run away, but it's on an ongoing basis.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're supposed to be, if we go out and we're hunting the mammoth or whatever way back when, or we've got to go get, we might lose one or two in the gang, but once we get back and we've carved it up and we get to eat, then we relax. We're in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest and healing part. But in this complicated world, we're not down regulating. We're losing that adaptability in our nervous system. We're ramping up, and we're not ramping down.
The times have changed.
Yeah. It's tough. And this is one of the biggest challenges we have with our patients, is how can we help them de-stress their brain?
There's
Absolutely.
a question that's come in from our friends on Facebook. This is live stream on Facebook. This is from Dudley Saint, who asks, how do we know that insomnia relates to changes in brain function?
How do we know? Well, we've done different study. One of the things we do with brain mapping studies, and we'll show abnormality in different brainwave patterns. We have 5 different certain brainwave patterns. They'll do these in sleep studies, and there's certain patterns that will cause the lack of sleep.
Okay.
But a lot of it again is this imbalance between the fight flight, which is called the sympathetic nervous system, and this rest and digest, the parasympathetic. So if we are ramped up, then we're not going to sleep, because our nervous system, we're trying to run from something. And that's also why we have so many digestive problems, because we're worried about this, and we're eating on the go, and our nervous system is in this fight flight mode. It's not in the rest and digest mode. So we need to sit down and take a deep breath, relax, and when we eat our food, so we can digest better.
I was just thinking, every day before on Christmas Eve, every child gets to appreciate the importance of sleep, because the next day they're absolutely they've got zero energy, yeah, and they often get sick as well. It's just digressing. Now, you learned what caused the decline, and you found some things that could help prevent or reduce the rate of decline. What this is for yourself. How what were your first steps? What did you decide to do first to try?
Well, what I did, it's a good question. And what I did for myself and what I did initially, I did a brain mapping and I found the imbalances, and I used a audio visual trainer. And this is something that I'd come across and searching for solutions. And it's a device called Brain Tap. And Patrick Porter developed it. It's been around for a number of years. It's one of the 4 top technologies in this audio-visual training. It's a chapter in the book. But basically, you can, through your eyes, through photic stimulation, or through your ears, binaural or isochromic beats, it can create an environment or a frequency that's better for the brain. So the brain will respond to light and sound. And so if you do the right frequencies, then the brain will restore into normal. So we can speed up a slowing down brain. We can calm down an overstimulated brain. We can balance the brain from left to right hemispheres just by putting in different signals. So that was one of the main things we did. And I also did some detoxification. I actually had high levels of mercury and lead and cadmium, and which were affecting my brain waves, and the trauma were slowing down my brainwave activity. Yes. I was actually speaking slower. Wow. You know, when I listen to myself speak, I still speak pretty slow, but I blame that because I grew up in Arkansas. That's a little state in the South of the United States. But anyway, I was literally speaking slower. And now when I hear myself speak recordings from different things, my cadence is picked up a little bit. So that was one of the main things we do. We've got a multitude of different natural therapies that we employ. We use neurofeedback. We're a big proponent of neurofeedback. You can target specific areas of the brain, specific nutrition. We look at hormone function. Hormone function is really big, like low thyroid function will double the risk of cognitive decline in Alzheimer's. So we look at the hormones and we help people tweak that, get their hormone system working optimally. We look at so we look at environmental. We're trying to figure out why the brain's not working well. And most of the time when we look at a person, part of the brain is working well or extremely well, but another part isn't. So we're just trying to shore up the parts that aren't working right.
Right. Now, one thing which you didn't mention in your list of things which can cause cognitive decline is aging.
Just the aging process. There can be some a little slower little response, but we look at, when we look at they do something called a quantum MRIs now, and they actually measure brain sizes, and you'll have some slight shrinkage. Just if you go from 20 years old to 80 years old, there'll be some shrinkage, but it's kind of uniform. And but what we see in the significantly cognitive decline, you'll see large areas. So of like the hippocampus, for example, which is a part of the brain that takes short-term into long-term memory, or the cerebellum, which is the lower brain. I'll have patients come in now and they have these MRIs where they go, my brain has shrunk, 40% here, 20% here. So, so there's a difference in the aging process. I mean, some of us can age gracefully and some of us aren't. One of my worst patients I saw was only 59 years old. I just saw a few weeks ago. His daughter, who's a doctor of chiropractic, brought him in, and just on a casual conversation, he seemed okay. He moved around all right, but he could not do it any 2 steps. Like if I said, John, I want you to go 3 steps and then take a right, go 3 steps, he couldn't do that. He might be able to do the first 3. So if we were on a screen, I said, okay, when you see this color, I just want you to hit the 1 key. He couldn't process it. It made no information. If I pointed to the letter A, I said, give me a word that starts with A. Didn't know what that meant. So that's pretty scary.
Could that describe someone that's got dyslexia? If someone has, you know, the way that the message is perceived is different to how it's sent. And yeah, is dyslexia a type of brain decline or brain mis?
Well, let's say I think dyslexia causes a lot of stress, you know, in people, and I think when you look at some of these things, like when people classify someone as ADHD,
Yes.
and they go through the aging process, those are increased risk factors for having earlier cognitive decline. I think many of those things, anxiousness, depression, are increased risk factors. So any kind of early, problems early on with the brain
Yes.
are going to increase your risk factors. But I want to emphasize that most of these things that can be corrected or greatly improved. I mean, one of the things we find out about children's, when you're talking about dyslexia, for example, and learning disability, 1 in 4 people have an eye tracking problem. It's just because their eyes are not coordinated together, and that's a lower brain function. The lower brain controls the nerves that control the eye muscles, and those can be specifically corrected. We use a technology called right eye. It's an infrared camera, and so we measure. This is something that's really big in the aging brain and cognitive.
Yes.
And when people's vision gets back coordinated again, it restores important brain function, because we know that our vision and our balance, our vestibular part of our vestibular system, are very intricate related to our cognitive function. And so when we get people's eye tracking and their balance improved, it has a synergistic effect in improving the cognitive function.
It's amazing. So it's sort of an overall balance. Your brain, our brains are balanced organs, and they require everything to be functioning.
Yeah, and one of the things we're finding is we've got to have, that's important when we talk about activities. The brain needs movement. Movement is good, and if we think of many societies where people had good qualitative longevity, they were kind of farmers. They kept moving around, they kept doing things, and they ate well, and they aged fairly well, as long as they didn't have a bad accident or something back, where they got an infection or something.
By movement, you're talking about us keeping the blood flowing, or you're thinking about stimuli for the brain?
Well, I just think movement, body movement.
Okay.
Just moving their bodies, working their bodies. It's really important. There's so many. Part of the problem with the aging brain comes about when people become sedentary. So just sitting, someone retires. It's pretty well established, like in America, when a man retires at 65, and if he doesn't have a hobby and he goes home and sits, then he's done in 5 years. That's usually his longevity after retirement. So it's very important. We're seeing an epidemic in young people now because they're sedentary. They've got their head down and they're moving their thumbs, and that's about it all day long. And it's creating a crisis. It really is. It's causing an imbalance in their brain development. It's important that children play and they climb and they do all these things. It's very critical for brain development. And in the aging process, and I don't know if it's true. I heard that in old China that that the old people, when they retired, were required to do Tai Chi and the parks or whatever, and because the government would recognize the Tai Chi kept them better balance, reduced fall risk, kept them healthier. So I don't know if that's true or not. I've heard that, but I recommend Tai Chi for my older patients all the time because, again, it keeps them moving.
Right. A question has come in from Dolly Cubano from Facebook. Dolly, I won't ask about the frequencies because that's more related to other equipment, but Dolly is asking what other treatments for removing heavy metals in the brain in other areas such as DMSA and DMPS. Have you heard of those two treatment methods or substances which chelate metal from the body? It's DMSA and DMPS.
Oh, DMSA you're talking about for binding heavy metals.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you asking me, are those effective?
Well, Dolly's asking really well, okay, I'll ask it my way. How can we get rid of heavy metals in our brain?
How do we get rid of the heavy metals? Yeah. Is that what?
Yes.
Yeah. That can be used. I do that. I use that when I do a provocative test in heavy metals. We'll give them DMSA because we want it to pull it out. I haven't really done that. I use a zeolite is one of the things I use a lot because it binds with heavy metals.
Okay.
And then we will do certain testing to see where the detoxification pathways. Lots of times glutathione is needed. So sometimes, depending on what the environmental toxin is, there's usually a specific nutrient or group of nutrients that are important in binding with it and detoxifying it. And what will happen many times is people will run out of that nutrient because they have so much of a body burden of a certain thing.
Right.
I actually use a product from a company, RNA, that has a zeolite, sublingual zeolite, that we use for a lot of the heavy metals. Seems to work well.
How safe is zeolite to take? If the heavy metals are being extracted, does your body react in any way?
Well, that's what we look at. We'll do when we have certain indications from someone's symptoms, signs and symptoms, or when we do their brain mapping, they have high delta levels. That's an indication of environmental. So we'll do like food chemical sensitivity, and we'll do I like a test called GPL tox from Great Plains. They're in the Kansas City metropolitan area. And through urinalysis, we'll look at things like herbicides, pesticides, plastics, phthalates, petroleum byproducts, and then we'll also do some organic acids test, which will check multiple levels of detoxification. So when we do that, we figure out what the person has and whether they're deficient. And the other thing that we often find is that they're getting poison through their water source or their air source. So one of the things that's really important, if someone has a heavy body burden, is that they may need to get better water and air filtration, to protect, so they don't keep poisoning themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's right. You can filter out be as healthy as you can, but while you're drinking this poison water or eating this poison-laden food.
Yeah, I have two of my practices in Florida, which is a huge agriculture area, fruits, strawberries, oranges, all kinds of things. And they have a very shallow aquifer. And invariably, when I have patients that are chronically ill here, when we test them, they're loaded with herbicides and pesticides. Yeah. So that's coming through the water and their food. So we've got to we've got to get some better filtration for them. I like a solid carbon block. We use a company called MultiPure. They're out of Las Vegas, and they have many filters that will take out 99.9% of herbicides and pesticides, even arsenic, which is very difficult.
Yes.
And even pharmaceutical drugs. You don't think about it, but if you're in a big metropolitan area, like you're in Beijing or I'm in Tampa Bay, you got millions of people. You've got, they're not metabolizing all these medications through their urine or their stool, and they're actually going into the water, and there's no way to clean these things. So many of these medications are active in parts per billion. Okay, that's like one part in a billion parts. So so we're actually accumulating medication in ourselves. We're getting medicated if we don't have good water filtration.
That's very scary. Excuse me. Charlotte Garland has asked a question. What do you recommend for someone who has balance issues from TBI?
Balance issues from traumatic brain injury. Yeah, this is very common. In fact, depending on where Sean is, there's a lot of doctors out there. We use something called the right eye, and we also do something called balance tracking, which assesses balance. But it's a good question. I wanted to tell the listeners that 9 out of 10 people, when they have a concussion, will develop eye tracking and balance problems. So this is something that's very common, and you can get a concussion without a loss of consciousness. You can get a whiplash injury or sports injury and not lose consciousness and be concussed. And so the eye tracking is a big deal, and the balance. So he needs to get with someone who does functional neurology. Depends on, I don't know what part of the country he's in,
right.
But there's different practitioners that have these tools that could assess them and have a correction for it.
Okay. There's people that are watching this video now, and they'll be thinking, well, how will I know if my brain is not firing on full cylinders? How do I know whether my mental health has declined slightly? Are there ways that we can do self-tests, if you like?
Yeah, there are. In fact, our website, we have access to that, and we'll let people we have unlimited access. So we have a private membership association. So someone for $10, they can join our membership, and we can give them access to cognitive functioning. And we have 12 different functions. So if they want to do a complete battery, there's no charge for that. They can go on and they'll rate them. So it's kind of like if you think you're in school, like if 90 to 100 you're an A, and 80 to 90 you're a B. So you can get an idea, but it does it with people's age group, and it'll put them in, this is an average range, or this is above average, or it's below average. So the significance is, let's say 60s passing marginally, in school, that would be a D minus, right? Nobody probably wants their brain to be a D minus, but it would be easier if you scored there to bring it up than if you were down in the 20s or 30s, right? Okay. So it's all relative, but there are objective testing out there, and one of the tests is you can even get. There's an app called the Stroop test, STROOP, and you can get that online. And so there's multiple tests, but what you can do, the one we use is real quick. It's a 60-second test, and it differentiates colors. So you're going to say, let's see, you see the word green, but it's in blue ink. Right. Okay, so you have to see it's the color you're seeing, not the word. But it's amazing. It seems very simple, but if you're in cognitive decline, you just can't do that. So that's an objective one of the tests, but that's just one of 12 different tests. When we have patients come in, we do brain mapping. The brain mapping shows, where the biggest imbalances are and from their history. So sometimes it's See this area above our, called the temporal area above our ears, processes our hearing. So you can actually have part of your brain that processes auditory sounds not working correctly, which would adversely affect your hearing. So you can actually have, the eardrum could be not working right, but you can also have a part of the brain that processes sounds not working right. And you can get that working better and help your understanding of words better. Same thing with the eyes. You can, the part of the brain that processes your vision could not be working well.
Right. Another question from Dolly. If we have a virus in the brain or the eye area, which is affecting the brain function, is there much that we can do to eliminate the virus? The brain itself has got a brain-blood barrier, so it's hard to get any drugs into
Yeah. So one of the things, blood-brain barrier. So while you brought that up, I'll address two things there, because that's something about, I want to make people aware about EMFs. There's a good book out called Radiation Nation, if you want to know about that. But one of the problems with the Wi-Fi and too much, it increases our blood-brain permeability and makes us more susceptible for getting heavy metals and different things accumulating up in there. But there are many ways to deal with viruses. We use a product called from Biocidin. It's a liposomal, and it's been well researched against Lyme's, and we use it for mold infections all the time. We use colloidal silver. So there's doctors that do functional medicine that will specialize in some of this. I don't know the person that's in there if she's ever seen a doctor does functional medicine, but you can do tests, and then there are natural therapeutics that you can recommend and then retest, and some of these things will clear out over time.
You mentioned pulsed EMFs from Wi-Fi, increasing the permeability of the blood-brain barrier.
Yes.
If this is known, why are they introducing a 5G, which is...
It's not going to be good.
No.
In Europe, they're actually they're passing more legislation to protect the public from public Wi-Fi and not allowing it in schools. But the increased radiation is going to be a problem. I mean, you've got 5G. If you put that to your ear, it's going to go all the way through your brain.
Okay.
So it's, if you think about what a microwave oven does to your food, okay, so different frequencies, 1200. So it's really it's dehydrating, and so it it's drying out your cells from inside out. But it's definitely a stressor. I mean, we're going to have, something we need to be conscious of, that we can't do away with phones, but like I try to avoid putting my phone in my ear any way I can. I'll be on speakerphone, or I'll be, hardwired to it in my car. And, just your routers, be sure that they're not next to you sitting by your computer. So we can reduce a lot of that. You can use grounding mats. There's these grounding mats that will help absorb the EMFs and keep them out of your body.
But Kelly, most of these suggestions you're offering now aren't going to be adopted by the general population. So 5G is coming out. How long do you think it will be before our brains will start showing outward signs of declining?
Weeks, months. The more susceptible people will be noticed first, but there's already people that are very sensitive to EMFs, and it's part of their genetic variants, and it's also their nutritional intake that they have more susceptible. But we need more antioxidants, and we need more things to protect that. One of the nutrients we have on our website that we recommend for our patients routinely for brain is a supplement called Micro Daily, which a Dr. Prasad developed, and he actually has 7 patents on this, and one of his protection against radiation. It's an antioxidant formulation that helps protect the brain from radiation.
Wow, okay, that's good to know. Gloria Sanchez is asking about high doses of melatonin. Does that help to detox the brain?
Melatonin is, I use melatonin a lot with my patients.
Yes.
One of the things that reduces our melatonin is when we're on a computer after dark, especially.
Yes.
There's a specific blue light that is doing that. So you need to avoid that, but if you're going to do that, and I recommend this to anybody who's on the computer a lot, is to get some blue light blocking glasses.
Yes.
You can get these from Amazon. There's obviously some will be rated better than others.
Yes.
But that will reduce that. But melatonin is very important it's the most powerful antioxidant. So it's an anti-cancer thing. So we want to have good sleep.
Yes.
So we want to be in a dark environment because that will inhibit it. But any kind of these prescription medications for sleep will actually decrease your melatonin.
Right.
One of the ways we can get melatonin naturally is to get sunlight through our eyes during the daytime. And if we get sunlight, that turns to serotonin, and serotonin converts to melatonin at night. But I don't see any problems with people taking melatonin. We use a sublingual liposomal technology for that. And I've had patients who had cancer that took up to 200, 250 milligrams a day. So different people will metabolize melatonin. So if you're a fast metabolizer, you can take a higher dosage. If you're a slow metabolizer, you can't. So one person might take 20 milligrams and wake up feeling refreshed. Another person could take that much, and then they feel like they're really groggy. They feel like they're drugged up. So it's just letting people know that there can be a big variance in your genetics on how fast you metabolize it.
Right.
Okay. So if you're waking up groggy, you just it's too much. Just back off.
Charlotte Garland has said that she heard that loss of the sense of smell is associated with dementia and also traumatic brain injury. Is this true?
Yeah, there's a lot of research, Parkinson's and early Parkinson diagnosis and Alzheimer's. And one of the things that we do is things like chocolate, cinnamon, coffee, things that have vanilla, and being able to smell that and differentiate that. So that could be a sign of some early cognitive decline. We look at the big picture, like we look at Alzheimer's, the fastest growing cause of death in the United States, 123% increase in 15 years. Most research now points that probably when someone's diagnosed, they've had it for 15 years. So when you start to have some of these early signs, you need to get to someone who can take a look at brain function. There's a growing number of doctors throughout the country and throughout the world. And, if you contact us, we'll try to see if we can get, if there's some resources out there for some of the listeners, and depending on what, where their demographic, where the city they're living in.
Yes.
But yeah, you need to get checked out and get some cognitive function, and look at your brain and see what can be done.
I'm very interested in these signs like how Charlotte brought up with regards to loss of sense of smell. Well, people can probably realize that my sense of smell isn't as good as it used to be. Are there other outward signs, simple signs, that may be an indication that there's bad days ahead?
Yeah, there are. And they're like, I have 17 or 18 in my lectures that I talk about, and a lot of them are just things like lack of patience and more frustration, easier triggered emotionally, outbursts. Could be a real common symptom is misplacing things.
Yes.
You know, your eyeglasses, your car keys, your, you know, whatever, you know, where'd I put this? Where'd I put this? And then that can progress to where more expensive things, you know, like where, you know, someone had a Rolex or something, like where'd I put that? That's, you know, $10,000 watch. That could be problematic. But yeah, the constant misplacing things, and also misusing words
Yes.
could be another one. Also, one of my patients was getting lost. You know, literally she'd be driving along and she'd have to pull over
That's scary.
and kind of go, okay, my day planner, where am I? What time is this? And where am I?
Oh,
Where am I going? So that's a pretty advanced
yeah.
stage. But
Okay. Very, very bad.
more problems with math. Um, so, you know, lots of times we'll ask patients, so John, I want you to subtract 4 from 40, you know, 40, 36, 32, 20, things like that, or 2 from 20s. More trouble with organizational things. And really, I would say that your peers, you know, like your family or your coworkers will start maybe noticing some little subtle changes,
Okay.
uh, you know, like odd, maybe we call them filtering problems too, you know, maybe saying or doing something a little bit out of character or inappropriate,
Yes.
you know, could be a sign.
Right.
And that's without having a beer after a rugby game.
Well, I was going to say, but I thought, no, we'll keep, this is a family show, so you'll keep to the facts. Now, Debbie Short is asking about colloidal silver. Do you use colloidal silver in your treatments?
Colloidal silver, yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, use that routinely.
And what dose do you use of the colloidal silver?
What dose?
Yes, like how much colloidal silver would someone consume?
Well, that's varying with different people. We usually have one that's 30 parts per million, which is very potent. We use the colloidal silver from this company, RNA, and I mentioned them before, because it's been tested against multiple different companies. And there's another company we use out of Utah, which had been tested and for things like infections and wounds and things like that.
Yes. And how effective is the colloidal silver? What is its value in treatment? Is it quite profound?
I'm sorry, say again?
Oh, if someone takes colloidal silver for declining health, brain health, do you see, you know, good results just from silver alone, or do you have to?
Yeah, I would say I've never. Usually, when we do colloidal silver, it's part of a general detoxification plan, and or part of a plan in treating a chronic infection. So it's very rare that I just use colloidal silver by itself. It's usually part of
Understand.
maybe 3 or 4 or 5 things, maybe.
Yes. The colloidal silver, does that cross the blood-brain barrier?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. And I've just asked that. Gloria Sanchez is asking, do you think zeolite crosses the blood-brain barrier?
Zeolife.
Yes.
I don't know that either.
Okay.
Good questions. I've got 2 things to go research now.
Yes.
But a lot of the that's a very good question. I would have to assume that the binders do, because when we retest patients, their heavy metal levels have dropped.
Yes.
Now the question is it specific in the brain? Yeah. That's a very good question.
Okay.
And I'll have to do some research on that.
Now, if you hadn't decided in your earlier years in your infinite wisdom to go overseas and try and fight the All Blacks in rugby and get beaten up a little bit. What sort of lifestyle would you choose to keep your brain functioning at full capacity? What would you recommend other people do to try and change their lifestyle so that in later years they've still got...
I think, some basic things, I think, and they're very foundational, and the same thing that's going to keep your brain healthy is the same thing that keeps everything else healthy. It's just more of a challenge in today's world. I mean, I think you need to eat real food. There'll be more Americans that go to bed tonight that did not eat a fruit and vegetable today than did. That's a problem. Displacement of packaged foods and processed foods versus real food. So we need to eat real food, and organic as much as possible to reduce residual herbicides and pesticides. We need to get a pure water source. And like I said, I like the solid carbon block. There's other ones that are rated. There's a specific international rating for different types of toxicity in there. So there's some RO units in there. The negative on RO is they take out minerals, and you got to get some minerals back in there. Yes. But a better water source, a better air source. We need to, the problem with when we live indoors, like I'm in Florida, it's hot all the time, so you're just sealed up. So whatever toxins are out there in your house, and they're being concentrated 2, 4, 8 times, and you're breathing them over and over again.
Right.
Well, we have in heavy, where it's warm all the time, there's a lot of moisture, you have a lot of mold. And one in 4 people have genetic predisposition for mold infections. Right. And there's a great screening test. If people go to www.survivingmold.com, there's a visual acuity test for $15 you can take, and it's about 95% accurate in doing that.
Wow.
So people who have recurring sinus or upper respiratory infections may have a mold infection. So just getting air and water, pure air and water, eating good food, and then the other thing, getting good sleep, good quality sleep. Get it dark. Try to avoid the electronics as much as possible. And the other thing is have a way to de-stress. I think that's one of the biggest things. All my patients, I recommend this audio visual trainer called Brain Tap, because it's something literally you can just put on your head, and in 20 minutes you can de-stress your brain. And I think you can get out of that fight flight physiology, get into that resting, digest, healing physiology. And that's really what I think the biggest challenge in today's world is us calming down and de-stressing, and we're getting that adaptability back in our nervous systems, where we can if we need to get up for something, we can, but we've got to be able to turn it off. And that's the problem we're having, is that people aren't able to turn it off.
We had the tail end of 2019. We're experts on so many things. We know what's harming us, but it just gets worse. Every year it seems that more obstacles are coming along the way. There's 5G just on the horizon, no pun intended, and there's no real great advancements that are positive to our health. It's like we're almost combating technology and our lifestyle.
Yeah, it's a tough, and I encourage people in my books to do that. Be a proponent, help protect what you can politically to do that. But I think we all ultimately have to educate ourselves, and we have to protect ourselves. And the government's not going to do it, and so we've got to protect ourselves, protect our family, and protect our people close to us. And we can do that, and you know, we can do that reasonably with some expenditure, but not a huge expenditure. We can, you know, if we get better air and water, we can protect our whole family.
Right. Yeah, you got to fight for it. Fight for our lives.
That's a challenge. It really is. You know, I've been in practice for 40 years, and this is something like tomorrow I'll be lecturing, and I'm doctors about how to implement changes to develop a brain-based practice and start helping people. And this is the problem when people are just sicker today than they were 40 years ago. In the 80s, it was very easy to get miracles with people.
Yes.
It's a lot more challenged today. They're more complicated. Their illness is more complicated, multifaceted. So,
if people want to know more about, you know, your book, for example, and other information, how can people get hold of you? Do you have a website?
Yeah, we have www.savingyourbrain.com. You can go in and you leave your name and number, ask a question or whatever.
Yes.
The book is available through Amazon, through Kindle, and through our website. And, you know, I would just encourage you, there's good information in there. I wrote this book. These are all natural things. These are all things that a person could access. And our clinic, we have, on our next book, we're going to talk about some of these technologies when you really have a problem. And you know, you also need to get some of these modern technologies to really get your brain rejuvenated. But, you know, Dr. Dale Bredson out of UCLA was a researcher in Alzheimer's, and he recently wrote the book, The End of Alzheimer's. And his conclusions are very much like mine, is that Alzheimer's, he thinks it's a disease, three things. It's a metabolic disease. We're talking about blood sugar dysregulation. It is a disease of infection, chronic infection, and it's a disease of environmental problems. So those are, you know, kind of what we talked about. That's a similar conclusions. Daniel Amen, that's another psychiatrist out of Chicago area. If anybody watched PBS, he uses something called SPECT imaging. So again, similar information, similar philosophy, and some similar solutions.
We're getting close to the end of the summer. Would you like to end with any statement, any positive statement for people? Here's the bell to prove it.
Well, I would just encourage people to read the book. Just as it's common. A lot of it is common sense. We got the grandfather clock going off here.
Yes.
Maybe drowning me out here. And sorry about that. Yeah, so you look at if you have, I think I encourage people to get a brain mapping. Go and get a brain mapping and get a baseline. Get a cognitive test. Okay. Certainly by the time you're 50. Okay. If you've had significant head trauma, if you have a history of anxiousness, you know, we have 50 million Americans that are medicated for anxiousness. Do you realize that? That's an epidemic. Depression, if you're having sleep issues, these are signs, you know, that you've got a brain problem. Okay. And get it in, and because it's much easier to fix a small problem than a big problem.
Yes. So get in early, get in quick, and nip it in the bud, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for coming on to our show. We've talked about a lot of issues. It's been very interesting. I didn't realize that the volume of people that had mental health issues or brain issues was so prevalent. There's just so many people that are suffering. I didn't realize that the impact of EMF radiation from Wi-Fi was so pronounced as well. That was quite surprising to me, in particular with opening up the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. that's quite scary because Wi-Fi is everywhere, and soon we're going to get 5G. That's very scary.
Yeah, and you have a perfect storm. You have things like glyphosates,
Yes.
which disrupt, your own natural bacteria in your gut.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't realize that our bacteria in our gut create 95% of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter which calms the brain. So most people, and every anti-anxiety medication or depression medication is trying to manipulate serotonin.
Yes. Yeah, let's treat the symptoms and see what happens in 20 years' time. Gosh, it's so scary, so scary. Well, thank you so much for coming into our show. It's been a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you for having me, John.
Okay, you take care.
Thank you so much, John.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.